Welcome back to the People's Mirror. Now, in this episode, we want to take a look at statements of Rigathi, Kalonzo, and Eugene Wamalwa in a place called Ithanga yesterday. And these statements were made partially in reply to some that were coming from the government camp and also independent statements to shape the camp of the united opposition moving forward. We will take a major look at those statements. But other than that, there have also been statements from the government side, including from Musalia Mudavadi, who now says that if he was in the position that President Ruto is currently, then he would have pushed for more privatization. And of course, of other CSs, including Honorable Bogo, who has now called Gachagua very, very stupid, for lack of a better term. Now, Ruto has also come back from the United States of America, defending not only the deal, the health deal between the United States of America and Donald Trump, which now he says that there is no country that can take advantage of us with that deal, but also a 200 billion loan, which is not part of this deal, but came as a result of the US tour. There's also concern, rather, that from the government side now, it's a movement of the cabinet secretaries now becoming the people that Ruto is using to actually champion his bid ahead of the 2027 major polls. Now, listen to this. For most people, the position of the cabinet secretary needs to be independent from politics because it's a position of service to the Kenyan people entirely. But when the president now uses this particular part of his cabinet to steer his campaigns post 2027, post formation of his government, then there are legal concerns around it. Funny enough, Kenyan courts have not barred the CSs from actually being campaign tools in Ruto's presidential bid of 2027. And now, Opiyo Wandayi declaring by himself that he will be championing the president's campaign in the Nyanza region is not in isolation, with other members of the cabinet now showing interest to actually push Ruto's bid in other parts of their region. Their names include Mbadi, of course, who is also doing this in the southern Nyanza area. We have seen Liki Nyanjui, who has also been accused of pushing Ruto's agenda from the Nakuru area, and other members that we will detail shortly. Most important thing, even before we go into these stories, is the fact that these cabinet secretaries were former senators, members of parliament, and they are people who had strong influence from the regions that they were pulled from before they were made cabinet secretaries. And as a result, you have seen the involvement of some of them, including Ruko, in the recently concluded Mbeere North contest, pulling so much crowd to the government side. If this is your first time joining the People's Mirror, please just hit the subscribe button so that we keep updating you on what happens in the Kenyan political scene as they unfold, but also so that you help us grow this channel. Now let's start with the main story. Rigathi Gachagua was making statements in a place called Ithanga, where he was accompanied by his friends, including Kalonzo Musyoka and Eugene Wamalwa. And there are certain political statements that he made in this particular gathering that are worthy of putting before the People's Mirror. And number one is the fact that now he promises the entire vote block of the central place, or of the central part of Kenya, to go to Kalonzo. He has promised Mr. Kalonzo and the united opposition that moving into the 2027 major polls, the voting block of this particular area, being the Mount Kenya area, will go to Kalonzo. According to Rigathi's estimates, he says that the people that are discrediting him in places like Embu and in Kirinyaga, of course talking of Governor Waiguru and such like people, will have a total of 50,000 votes. And so if 50,000 votes were to go to President Ruto, Rigathi Gachagua is still very confident that 7 million will go in one basket, being the united opposition. Now he says that this particular voting pattern is something that every other person that is external to the Kikuyu community might not be aware of, but he says that it's one that has been tested before, but it has proven that the Kikuyu community can vote as a block. And now he says that this particular voter block that has been said to be the 30% determinant on the 50% plus one that a presidential candidate must attain to become the president of this nation is now going to go the united opposition's way. Now let's delve into much of that story. The first thing he says is that, as I said, that he promises that the mountain will vote in one basket, making these promises to his two co-principals who are there, being Eugene Wamalwa and Kalonzo himself. He says that 50k will go to Ruto, and 50k will be the total number of votes coming from Embu, Kirinyaga, and every other place where it's being discredited will go to Ruto. Now, he says that this particular block, as I said, is not now just 7 million. He says that this voter block has previously been 6 million, but he's seeing a very strong trajectory of these numbers moving from 6 million to 8 million between now and when these polls will be held. And out of the entire 8 million, he projects that only 50,000 votes can be garnered by the government from the Mount Kenya area, leaving the rest in the basket of the united opposition. So he confirms that Ruto is cornered in 2027, and this is the reason why now Rigathi says the government camp is on his trail consistently, because the government camp knows very well that he is going to deliver the mountain votes to the united opposition. So this chase and trail conversation, he says, is as a result of the fact that the government is aware that the voting bloc of the Kikuyu community are going to vote behind Rigathi Gachagua. He says in 2002, they did not divide votes, and that is why Kibaki won with a landslide. And so he says that whereas he is aware that, of course, this is not just a family decision, it's also a family decision that will call for support from friends beyond the borders of course, the mountain and the Kamba region. He says that the unity of this bloc in 2002 brought a unifying factor with the presidency. And he says that now they are even more aware and more wiser compared to 202, to learn from the mistakes that they have seen from 202 to date, and to focus in their camp and deliver that camp holistically to the united opposition. With the numbers, Rigathi silently and in a jest makes an attempt to reply to the allegations made by Ms. Waiguru that the united opposition is devoid of mathematical calculations of numbers that will render the lead towards their camp out of the 25 million registered voters in Kenya. And so Ms. Waiguru was asking Rigathi Gachagua, rather, in a previous episode that we did here at the People's Mirror, to come up with a structured plan of how they intend to accommodate or to win the 25 million structure, as something that would perhaps convince her to join the camp. Now, of course, supporters of Rigathi Gachagua from Kirinyaga asked Ms. Waiguru, who had invited her to the camp of Wamunyoro, if she didn't feel comfortable to actually join that camp. And she said that other people, including people from her own team, have actually extended an invitation. Now, in what turns out to be a move by President Ruto to have cabinet secretaries and governors to actually campaign for him, the movement by Waiguru, rather the loudness of Waiguru's attack of Wamunyoro, is now put in context, and later on we'll take a look at that. But in replying to this numbers conversation that Waiguru was talking about, Rigathi now answers that 7 million will come from the Mount Kenya region, after Ruto will have taken his 50,000 votes from that region, according to Mr. Rigathi Gachagua. 3 million will come from Ukambani, 4 million will come from Western, and 2 million will come from the coast. Mr. Gachagua is confident that the relationship that they have created with the coastal area and the Western area over the period preceding the recently concluded by-elections confirms a solid relationship that can work into 2027. And he says that in Malava, for example, that he is confident they won, was a testament that the united opposition is strong in the Western region. So Western, Luhyas being the second populous voting population in Kenya, if merged with some parts of Nyanza, you say, that will be amenable to vote towards Kalonzo and other members of the united opposition, Mr. Rigathi Gachagua targets around 4 million from that particular camp. Now, in Coast, remember the DCP party fronted the second candidate, or the candidate that became second in the Magarini by-elections, Mr. Stanley Kenga Karisa, who had actually jumped camps from the UDA party to join the DCP party. And so joining this particular party in a region that has predominantly been an ODM region was something that the DCP party celebrates moving forward. And so he says this relationship can be studied in the coastal region to garner around 2 million votes from the coastal region in the major polls. And when you talk of Ukambani, of course, this is the voting block of Kalonzo Musyoka. We have not seen any resentment from the Ukambani area that tries to dilute Kalonzo's influence in that region so far. Perhaps there would be, other than the Sonko introduction that now people have interpreted as a way of dividing the Kamba votes, not only in the city but nationally, because of the wave of Mike Sonko with the Gen Zs and the youths that is independent of the wave of the Wiper Patriotic Front. But these divisions coming at this time and Hawa has not since diluted the fact that the kingpinship conversation in the Kamba region still remains to be Kalonzo Musyoka. And so Mr. Rigiji looks at Kalonzo Musyoka's backyard as a solid voting bloc that will listen to Kalonzo Musyoka and will render around 3 million votes to the united opposition. Of course, he says that 7 million will come from Mount Kenya. So he's giving himself and Martha Karua and Justin Muturi and Linturi the bigger task of delivering 7 million to this arrangement. He leaves 3 million just to Kalonzo. Then he's giving Natembeya and Eugene Wamalwa, of course, and of course Matiang'i, a bigger task of delivering 4 million from the western Kenya part. And of course 2 million coastal will be a joint effort that they will be throwing all their weight behind. Remembering very well that the member of the Parliamentary Service Commission and the current member of Parliament for Nyali constituency, Honorable Ali Mohammed, is also in this particular united opposition camp. So they already have groundsmen even in the coastal area that can cheer this particular movement to render 2 million votes from the coast to the united opposition. So the problem of Kenya now, he says, is not tribalism. He says that it's being attacked on grounds of tribalism, yet the problem of Kenya is no longer tribalism. Rigiji says that the trouble we have in this country is theft, misappropriation of public funds, violation of human rights, and increased privatization of public entities. And so if these things are addressed, things like theft of public funds and the misappropriation of the same, things like violation of human rights are addressed, and things relating to privatization of public entities includes more public participation in it, then he says that the problem of Kenya might be fixed. He says that the tribal issue is rather a Ruto connotation to paint the united opposition as a tribal gang. Kalonzo later on, while downplaying the tribal statement, says that in Eldoret the UDA party is the dominant party, yet you do not call Ruto tribal. So what is the problem with the mountain region having DCP as the dominant party and leading to the tagging of Rigathi Gachagua as a tribal person? So they're downplaying the fact that Kenyans tribes live in harmony and there is no tribal problem. The main problem in the room is theft, misappropriation of public funds, violation of human rights, and increased privatization of public entities. Now let us take a look at Kalonzo's speech in the same Ithanga gathering, where he started by Kufa Driver, Kufa Makanga, in the presence of Gachagua. Of course, this was the slogan earlier when Rigathi Gachagua was being ousted from his position as the deputy president and being replaced by Kindiki. The entire movement of the Gen Zs then was not just to have Gachagua out, because that was not the intention. The intention was to scrap the entire leadership from the face of it and replace it with the new leadership. So then there was a coined phrase called Kufa Dereva, Kufa Makanga that came as a result of that, calling for removal of President Ruto and Gachagua alike. So Kalonzo says that from the onset of the Gen Z's call, it was not only to remove Rigathi Gachagua, but Ruto downplayed that twist to have Gachagua's snake in the guillotine and save himself as a result of that. And so he says that the original call of the Kenyan people should not be downplayed, because the original call of the Kenyan people from the very beginning was to have both the driver and of course the turnboy of this particular matatu go home. He says that when you're a politician, you are not a devil incarnate, and this particular religion approach is something that we have to take a keen interest into. Of course, President Ruto's win in 2022 was a result of how he tapped into the reasonability of the religious mind, and so churches and everywhere he walked in was receiving him, while other politicians in the other camp were dealing with the rallies. Ruto was having his rallies in church, and so this approach is now being adopted by the united opposition. They say hate them so much that you become one of them. And Kalonzo now, his last two public speeches made have been to the reverence of God and to the acknowledgement of his position in human life, which is actually a center way of convincing the voter towards your way. Most people, of course, might not be having the conversation of God publicly, but it's something that is center and dear to their hearts. And so when a politician taps taps into it, there is how they resonate with that politician instantly. So Kalonzo says that being a politician does not mean that now you are an incarnate of the devil. He says then some politicians still hold dear the position of Lord Jesus in their lives, and that is the central pillar in their lives. So he tries to take away the notion that politicians are liars as a generality, and says that of course there are certain politicians that are actually very much liars, but he also asks the public to look at all politicians not from the prism of liars, but from understanding that there are some among them who still put Jesus Christ as the center of their pillar. And Kalonzo Musyoka now identifies as such a politician. He says that now he has had a platform to talk about the 2007 betrayal talk, which now has had a lot of calm saying that he betrayed certain people in 2007. Let's put this in context. One of the reasons why the ODM supporters might have a pinch of salt of supporting Honorable Kalonzo is the history of 2007, where most ODM supporters have since blamed Kalonzo for jumping ship and betraying Raila Odinga in the key moments that he was needed most. And so Kalonzo has not really ever had a platform to talk about this thing publicly, but in Ithanga he hinted that himself was the victim in the 2007 saga and is not the person that actually betrayed anyone in the 2007 saga. He says that as a result of the 2007 elections, he lost 1 million votes. And he says that it takes a politician to understand the weight of losing 1 million votes. And he says from the very onset in that particular 2007 race, his idea was that if Raila was going this way and Kibaki was going this way, then he intended to go in the middle of them. And he says that was the outcome of that particular election. So he looks for political leadership in an avenue and calling he now downplays betrayal talks in 2027, saying that he was the central victim in those particular elections after he lost 1 million votes, which he said he lost as a result of the fact that voters did not find it very easy to differentiate between ODM Kenya and the ODM party, being the fact that the symbol of both parties was an orange, but ODM Kenya was a cut orange and the ODM party was a full orange. And so as a result, voters who wanted Kalonzo did not know how to vote for which party and ended up giving their votes to the ODM original party. He says that he joined camps with Kibaki in 2007 to stop bloodshed, because as a result of that particular election that was hardly contested, there was going to be bloodshed against the Kamba and the Kikuyu. And so tapping into the convenient cousin talk that is their slogan right now within the United Opposition, he says that it was necessary to protect the bloodshed of the cousins. And so a Kamba and a Kikuyu had to come together in that particular time to save the communities from bloodshed. And he says as a result of that particular joining hands, he saved himself also from not being in the Ocampo list, where others who involved themselves in the bloodshed found themselves in. Now Kalonzo has confirmed that Gema is now a real movement in Kenya. For each Gema community person that is born from their regions, they will find something strong as Gema that identifies them as one political community moving forward. And from that Gema arrangement, he confirms that now Rigathi Gachagua is the spokesperson of the family, saying that this is a family affair that should not be attacked. And when it comes to the voice of Gema right now in the Kenyan political scene, they have left that particular reserve for Rigathi Gachagua. He downplays tribalism talks against Gachagua, and he says that these particular talks for protecting the mountain should not be termed as tribalism talks, because as I said earlier in the beginning of the pod, now the United Opposition are likening their influence in their regions to UDA's influence in Eldoret, which they say cannot be termed tribal. So they say politics is sometimes coined in that way, that you gain your support from your backyard. And so when that backyard now doubles to also be your tribal affiliation, then it should not be viewed from the prisms of being a tribal issue, but from the prisms of having home support. He premises that he is wiser now to defend the votes And doing it the Kibaki way in 2007, he intends to defend these particular votes in 2027 and deliver this particular win to the camp, being the united opposition, and to secure it moving forward. Of course, when you are talking about the Kibaki way, and specifically in 2007, then it's not such an admirable way, because you remember Kibaki was sworn in at night at the exclusion of everyone else. So we don't know whether this is the Kibaki way that Honorable Kalonzo is talking about, or is talking about the Kibaki way of winning votes, as he says in 2007, that the other party is left with no option but to accept the result. Of course, the 2007 election is one of the hugely contested elections in Kenya, where there is a camp that believes that election was not won by Kibaki and Kalonzo, but it was alternatively won by Raila Odinga. So these statements of Kalonzo doing in the Kibaki way is rather confusing. But towards the end, he intends to put Ethicon and his colleague Marjan, who is the CEO of the IEBC, through private prosecution for allegations and criminal conduct that he says was witnessed as part of them dismantling the IEBC and them disseminating their duties ultra-vires to the provisions that run the IEBC as a commission. So he says in Mbeere North and in Malava there were actions of commissioners that were very, very independent of the requirements of the commission, and so he intends through private prosecution to have Marjan and Ethicon answer those claims. Eugene Wamalwa did not say much in Ithanga, but he says that the country is headed in a wrong direction, and that's something that everyone can testify. He says that capitation that they left to the Uhuru Kenyatta at 22k in education has now come down to less than 12,000, showing that the country does not prioritize key important things that have solidified us and have skyrocketed our economy in the East African region, including education. And so for this, he faults President Ruto's government, saying that he now talks deliberate scheme. He has seen that he now talks of deliberate scheme from the United Democratic Alliance to actually discredit and divide the united opposition, but he promises unity in the united opposition, saying that they came together for unity, of purpose and love of the nation that cannot be divided, and will transcend all these division talks and bring victory for the Kenyan people in 2027. Eugene faults the ruling team for stealing votes in Mbeere North and Malava, and he blames Ruto for selling what now he calls Rigathi phobia, something that comes from the Raila phobia, which he says also President Ruto was selling. For this Rigathi phobia, of course, they are talking about the Nyanza talk, where the members of the ODM party say that they do not have anything against Kalonzo, but might have reservations to certain friends that Kalonzo keeps. And so as a result, the united opposition have paraphrased, or rather interpreted, that statement by Senator Kajwang of friends to mean Rigathi Gachagua, and he says that these are moves by President Ruto to create a Rigathi phobia image, that Rigathi is not a good person, something that he says President Ruto invested so much time in creating Raila phobia against the late Prime Minister. And he says now this Rigathi phobia will not exist and will not divide the united opposition moving into the major polls. It's been a pleasure recapping for you what has come out of the Kenyan political scene in the past 24 hours. Of course, worthy to mention is the fact that the CS for ICT, Honorable Kabogo, has now rendered Rigathi stupid, saying that the statements of Rigathi Gachagua are stupid compared to the development that they are bringing to the Kenyan people, saying that the Dumberi Muthaiga Road will now be dual way as part of that development. And he gave a testimony of a person he taught from the streets all the way to university, and is a lawyer, and is now has taken affordable housing for the mother, someone in Mukuru Njenga, as part of development. Kenyan politicians are really insensitive to the real issues, and sometimes when they speak, it's a laughable scene. But that is what has happened in the Kenyan political scene in the past 24 hours, ladies and gentlemen. Until our next episode.